Byer. Good morning, Mr. Byer. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Good morning.
Thank you. Go ahead and raise your right hand. There we go. Yeah. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you are about to provide is true and accurate?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And we have just a little bit of a lag in the connection there, so just for the parties and for you, Mr. Byer, we just need to be cognizant that we're not speaking over one another, so thank you. Mr. Jorde?
Please state your name.
Greg Byer.
And Mr. Byer, did your spouse, Patricia Byer, previously testify in this matter?
Yes, she did.
And I understand you have divided up testimony and that you'd like to give some testimony that your wife did not get into relative to your land. Is that correct?
Correct.
And which counties do you own land that is being targeted by the proposed Summit Hazardous pipeline?
Well, the land that my wife testified on is in Cherokee County, and the land that I'm testifying about is in Iowa County.
Very good. And you caused to be prepared what's known as pre-filed testimony, where you pose essentially to yourself questions and you answer them, and you've also provided various documentation to support your resistance. Is that correct?
Correct.
And rather than going through, sir, all of those questions and answers, if we were to do that here today, would your answers that you would give now be substantially similar to those that were provided in your written submission?
Yes, they would.
And can you think of any material corrections to your pre-filed testimony that you'd like to make us aware of?
Well, I just would like to add a few details maybe to some of the concerns I have.
So we'll get to that in a moment, but in terms of correcting an error, do you have any material errors you'd like to first address before we move to updates?
Well, yes, I'd like to talk about two new concerns that I have that I did not have at that time. The first being the water usage, and it's my understanding that there's going to be a considerable amount of water needed to make this pipeline function. And I've been concerned for a long time about water usage in Iowa and in fact the whole country. And it's my understanding there's different types of aquifers. And for instance, like the Ogallala aquifer, it's more of a gravel vein, and water can enter an aquifer like that much easier than, say, a sandstone aquifer. So with proper management, they might be able to control excess use on an aquifer like that, like the Ogallala. But in Iowa, if it's a sandstone aquifer, many sandstones can take centuries or millennia to replenish the water supply that's in them. So I think we have to be aware of this, that water in Iowa, though we might take it for granted, it's not an unlimited resource. So I think it's something that we need to be concerned about. My other issue that's come up to me, I recently noticed that there were 13 congressmen that voted for the legislation that provided the money that Summit is going to harvest. That these 13 congressmen wrote a letter to the Biden administration asking for a moratorium on CO2 pipelines. And I believe that the gist of their letter was that they weren't sure that these pipelines were safe. And my question, I guess, to the board is, did they have access to data that we do not? Because when my wife and I were talking to Summit last winter and early spring, we would ask them about if they had plume dispersion modeling. And they said, well, we have some, but we can't share that with you. And, you know, when you refuse to provide information like that, to me, I take that as the same way I look at a witness that pleads the fifth on the witness stand. You know, you don't want to incriminate yourself. So I'm assuming that because they won't share with us what it is, that it must reflect poorly on their project. So I guess in our mind, we would like to know what is a safe setback from this pipeline? How far does a person's house need to be away from the pipeline to be considered safe? I know it's unlikely that a pipeline will rupture, but it's not impossible either. So I guess, I don't know if the board has this information. They're the ones, I guess, that are going to ultimately rule on whether this pipeline gets a permit to go ahead. And I just think that we need to know what that safe setback is. And I'll give you an example. On the pipeline that's going through the Iowa County farm, after it leaves our property and it continues north, it goes by a neighbor's house, and I believe it's less than 500 feet from the house. Now, I find it hard to believe that is a safe setback from a ruptured pipeline. From the data that we've seen, granted it wasn't, I don't know the size of the pipe at this time, but we just feel that we need more information, and we think that the board should have more information before they rule and allow a pipeline like this to be built. So, and for instance, who's liable for this, and who would be negligent? Would the board be negligent in their actions if they allow this pipeline to be built and it goes by my neighbor's house and the unthinkable happens? Or
state your objection.
Yeah, I was happy to give leeway for the witness to list the two additional concerns in the interest of trying to get along this morning, but I think we're well beyond simple updates to pre-filed testimony. This is extensive new testimony, which is not appropriate.
Mr. Jorde.
Well, I think it is appropriate, given that it wasn't until September that certain plume modeling was provided and confidentially. And we've had a lot of testimony from Summit on safety or alleged safety and plume modeling in the interim that would have been impossible for any party to pre-file testimony relative to that newly shared information in September. So I think he's about finished with that in any event. But.
Okay, that objection is sustained. Mr. Jorde, go ahead and ask your next question.
All right. Did you have any other updates?
I guess the thing I'd like to talk about was the amount of money that Summit was offering them for.
Objection.
State your objection.
Again, whatever the witness wanted to talk about needed to be in the pre-filed testimony. This is the time for questioning about what was pre-filed.
Well,
Mr. Byer,
I guess
Mr. Byer, we need to let your attorney weigh in, and then we'll rule on the objection, and then we'll proceed. But thank you, I appreciate it.
Well, we don't even know what he was going to say, so I think the objection is premature.
I believe.
Your Honor, he said the other thing I would like to talk about. That certainly suggests a direction that is incompatible with the stage of the hearing we're at with regard to pre-filed testimony.
I was just going to try to verify that within the record. That does appear to be what he said. Well, Mr. Byer, if you have a correction to make, please proceed to state that. If it's an addition, then this is not the appropriate time. So, Mr. Jorde, you can proceed as you would like with your witness.
So I don't know what you were going to say before you were cut off by Summit's counsel. But was that another update to your testimony?
I guess so.
Okay.
I don't have a written testimony in front of me, so I'm not sure exactly what I said in that testimony. But I just wanted to discuss there's potential for loss of crop production by building the pipeline.
Okay, and I think, in fact, you were slated today to testify about land damages. So I think that's part of your testimony, and others may have questions. But at this time, sir, I'd like to get into evidence your pre-filed testimony for JCD Byer Family Farm LLC and Craig Byer. So we would offer exhibits. Landowner exhibits 282, 283, and 284.
And just to clarify, that's the pre-filed testimony and pre-filed exhibits 1 through 25?
The attachments, yes.
No objection.
And then, Mr. Byer, you mentioned a letter to President Biden from certain congresspersons who previously supported at least the money set aside in the Inflation Reduction Act, but now question CO2 on safety grounds, and that is Exhibit 636. We would offer that as well.
I thought we had that in before we broke last month, but in any event, no objection.
All right, thank you.
Sorry. With no objection, the board will admit as labeled and give it the way due.
Oh, and I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Forgive me. I didn't hear. Did we get 282 and 284 actually admitted?
Sorry, in reference, that was to all of them, but yes.
Okay, thank you. And then lastly, Exhibit 647 is a potential alternative route map for the JCD Byer property, and we would offer that as well.
No objection.
With no objection, the board will admit.
Thank you. All right, sir, at this time, I'm going to turn you over for cross-examination, and others might have questions about your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Whippel?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Byer, my name is Tim Whippel. I represent 7 counties in this proceeding. Is your wife Patricia Byer?
Yes.
And did she submit a letter to the board earlier this month or in October?
Boy, I don't know. Did you? I can't answer that. She's very much more involved in this whole pipeline thing than I am. Works on it nearly every day.
Well, let me suggest that she did. And in that letter, there's some testimony about your neighbors. Are you familiar with how close the pipeline is to your neighbors' properties?
Yeah.
So if I asked you some questions about that, you would know the answers to those?
Well, I think so. I guess.
Well, let's try it. If you don't know, don't guess. Is your wife's letter indicates that some neighbors live 473 feet from the proposed pipeline, but doesn't mention a name or anything or give any map coordinates or anything. Do you have any sense that that's correct, or which neighbors those might be?
Yes, I do. I think it's correct.
Do you know the names of those folks, or who owns that property that's 473 feet away?
Yes, it's Robert and Pam Linebaugh.
Linebaugh?
Yeah, correct.
And then in another part of the letter, she indicates that another neighbor lives 699 feet from the proposed path. Do you know who that might be?
Yes, that would be it'd be the Barney Wallace and no. I guess, do you know which parcel that's referring to?
I don't. That's why I'm asking about it. There's not
I think that might be on the Cherokee County parcel. And that would be Kurt and Joyce Rasmus.
Joyce, what's that last name?
Rasmus, R-A-S-M-U-S.
Other neighbors live 485 feet. Do you know who those might be?
I would, the only other neighbors I think that are really close would be to the Wallaces. And that would be Jay Wallace, and if his wife passed away this spring. She and her sister own the land, and Jay has remodeled the house, and he lives there part of the time in the summer, and he travels in the winter.
So you said Jay or Jayan?
Well, he goes by Jay. I think his actual name is Jearl, Jearl.
Okay. I guess what I'm wanting to explore is you seem to have a lot of neighbors nearby who are fairly close to the proposed route, but who aren't impacted landowners directly. And so your wife's letter indicates that some of those folks tried to intervene and were denied.
Well, I'm sure that would be the case for Robert and Pam and Kurt and Joyce, because the pipe goes through, but not their property, so they were not allowed to comment.
And so the letter your wife's submitted to the board ultimately urges the board to have a hearing so that neighbors can testify about their concerns about it, because not being allowed to intervene and not being directly impacted landowners. What I'd like to ask you is, are you aware that some counties have adopted setback requirements at the local level?
Objection, Your Honor.
State the objection.
Several. First of all, I think this is beyond the scope of the remaining questions about land impacts to the Ida County parcel that we're talking about. Obviously, a lot of this stuff about Ms. Byer's letter, which the witness said he wasn't familiar with, got some distance away, and now we're talking generically about some counties, not even necessarily Mr. Byer's own county, and what they've passed for ordinances is just beyond the represented scope of the witness's testimony.
Mr. Whippel.
Well, it indicates that Mr. Byer split testimony with his wife, and I'm not having the opportunity to actually talk to his wife. And so I was just trying to initially lay some foundation there about the situation in and around Mr. Byer's property in order to really get at the questions that I'd like to ask, which are about local land use and zoning, which no other party in this proceeding is really pursuing.
Your Honor, the fact that there's no party pursuing that, certainly Mr. Whippel had an opportunity to put on a case, could put on his own witnesses on that. The fact that he didn't get to talk to Ms. Byer doesn't change what the allocation of the witness scope is, so we would maintain our objection.
Okay. Mr. Whippel, do you have anything else to add?
I don't know what Mr. Dubinsky means by the allocation of the witness's scope, but like everyone else, confronting most of Mr. Jorde's witnesses for the first time, and would like to get a few facts in the record from this witness and then move on. I don't have many more questions.
Yeah, just to clarify, Mr. Whippel, it's not technically the first time because we've had that pre-filed testimony for months. So if we can move on, please.
So are you sustaining the objection?
Yes.
Well, I just need to lodge an objection, if I can, in support of Mr. Whippel. He clearly should be allowed to ask those questions. I mean, through any witness that appears. So that would be our objection.
Objection noted. Go ahead, Mr. Whippel.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Taylor. I didn't see your tag.
I usually don't need it. Mr. Byer, I'm Wally Taylor. I represent the Sierra Club. And in your prepared testimony regarding the Ida County farm, you said that the land would be damaged by the pipeline. What makes you think the land will be damaged by the pipeline?
Well, I think that whenever you have heavy construction on our soils, there will be a certain amount of compaction. There will be shallow compaction, which can be addressed with tillage and maybe crop rotations. And then there's what they refer to as deep compaction. And that deep compaction is virtually untreatable, and that can last for decades. So the big factor in what's going to happen is going to be the soil type and the soil conditions when the construction occurs. If they had built this pipeline last summer in the peak of the drought, when the soil was very hard and dry, compaction would probably be minimized. But we don't know what the soil conditions are going to be like when they build the pipeline. So it seems to me that a farmer would be foolish to settle for anything less than the absolute maximum amount under the worst conditions, because we don't know. I mean, the fairest way would be to do yield checks every year and then pay on a yearly basis based on the damage. But some won't want to do that, I'm sure. So I just think it puts the farmer in an unfair position to try to determine what the damage could be, because we just don't know.
Well, are you aware that Summit has said that they're going to take all precautions to make sure that the soil is separated and put back like it should be, and that there'll be no permanent damage?
Well, I'm aware of what they intend to do, to strip the topsoil off, but that has, and that putting it back then is good from a nutrient standpoint, but it has no bearing whatsoever on deep compaction. The deep compaction is going to occur when they run the heavy equipment across there and they install the pipe. You can put the topsoil back. That has no bearing whatsoever on deep compaction. And like I said before, we won't know the extent of that deep compaction until we know what the soil conditions are when they actually build the pipeline.
Well, is it your understanding you can farm over the pipeline easement once the pipe is installed?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
So doesn't that minimize or take away any concerns you have about the fertility of the land and loss of income?
No, because we won't know what that deep compaction is. We don't know how much loss of yield there will be on that easement. I would guess if we have normal moisture conditions, it'll be significantly more than what Summit estimates.
You talked in your written testimony about the tile lines on your property. What makes you think that the tile is going to be damaged in the first place?
Well, because I think that they're going to cut through the tile, and then I think they intend to repair the tile if they see it, If they don't see it, they'll just keep on going and there'll be no repair made. And as a landowner, I won't know if the tile was fixed correctly because it's been so dry and then the tile, there's no water in any of the tile lines. So we won't know until there's another wet season whether the tile lines are working or not. So one of my biggest concerns is that, you know, someone goes through there and they don't get it repaired properly. It's 3, 4, 5 years before we have a wet season. And by that time, Summit might have gone belly up, and then who's going to come and fix it?
I think in your written testimony you talked about negotiating in good faith with a Summit. Have you really tried to negotiate in good faith with them concerning the easement agreement and any alternative routes?
Well, we talked about that with them, but they never really came back and proposed an alternative route for us.
May we get the KMZ file up just so we can see what the route looks like? This is on the Iowa County property. Can you see that, Mr. Byer?
Yes.
And I'm assuming that the red square in the center there is your Iowa County property?
Correct.
Okay. And did you ever talk to anybody from Summit about going around your property? I see that it's just kind of not really a corner cut, but just to the northeast corner of your property.
Yes, we suggested that they just slide that up to the northeast and go stay on the property of the people that had already signed on and wanted it. And we even said that if they went up to the extreme corner and just used the very corner of our property, then if the damage to the ground was severe, maybe I could put that chunk in CRP then and we wouldn't have to farm it at all. But we've never had any success. They've always said, well, we'll talk about it, but they never come back with anything. And they used to talk to us frequently, but last spring when they found out, I assume that we were with Dom in a law firm, they quit talking to us, so they're not allowed to speak to us anymore. So we haven't had any contact with them since, I'd say, probably May.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Ms. Greenhagen?
Thank you. Mr. Byer, my name is Chris Greenhagen, and I just have a few follow-up questions from what Mr. Taylor just asked you. You talked a little bit on page 4 of your testimony with your concerns with tile. Would you want Summit to be responsible for repairing their tile system even if you didn't discover the damage 5-7 years down the road?
Well, yes, I think Summit needs to be responsible for repairing anything they damage, whether it be tile lines, terraces, anything. This farm didn't have any terraces, only the tile lines. But yes, I feel Summit should be obligated to fix anything they break.
And then in page 4 references attachment 1 as describing where your tile lines are located on your property. Could staff please bring up attachment 1 on his testimony? Be page 47. Thank you. Could you describe to me where on the parcel or on this photograph the tile lines are located?
Well, if you see that the dark line coming up from the south and east on the parcel next to it, I think that's where the tile line goes up there, and like where that indicator is now, and then up. Then it goes up north into the next parcel.
So on the the northeast corner of your parcel.
Right. Pretty much right along where the line, where they want to run the pipe.
Are there any other places on that property where there's tile?
Yes, there are quite a few, but they're away from the pipeline enough that I don't think they'll be impacted.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And about how deep is that tile? Do you know?
Well, let me explain why I don't have exact answers for this. My sisters and I we have what we call the family farm. 2 years ago, we did a land swap with my neighbor, so we only just acquired this parcel 2 years ago. And when we acquired that, I asked if they had maps of the tile lines, and how many feet and all that. Nobody could provide me any of that information. So the only information I have is what we can determine from the outlets where the tiles discharge. Those are not affected, in my opinion, by the proposed pipeline. But the one there that we just discussed, that's right in line and might be just parallel to the proposed pipeline. So I'm assuming they're probably 4 to 5 feet deep, but I don't know.
Thank you. And then on page 6 of your testimony, you expressed some concerns about the restrictions in the easement. Could you explain for me what is your understanding of what activities would be specifically prohibited in the area of the easement?
Well, I don't believe we can construct anything in there. I don't think we could run, or like if there was some other project involved, I don't think we'd be able to do that. We couldn't put a building up there, I don't think, or anything like that. So it's probably unlikely, in all honesty, that we would do that on that particular parcel. But the biggest thing I have with the easement is that it's permanent. I don't think it should be longer than the life of the pipe.
Thank you. And then on page 36 of your testimony, you talk about that there's going to be injury to social conditions. Could you explain that a little bit more of what you mean by that?
Injury to social conditions?
Mm-hmm. I just didn't understand that concept, and I was just looking for just a simple explanation of what that is.
I guess, to be honest, I don't know what I was thinking about when I wrote that. Sorry.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. I have no further questions.
Ms. Coles.
Good morning, Mr. Byer. I'm Jean Colas. I'm a landowner like yourself, and I just have a few questions. Can you first of all bring up the KMZ map again for me, please? Okay. I noted, do you have a waterway going through where the proposed pipeline is through your land?
No, it's not a waterway. It's just where that was wet at one time. There might have been a waterway there, but there's not one there now.
I see raised portions. Is there terracing on that plot?
No terraces.
Okay. You initially indicated that you were willing to negotiate an alternate route with Summit and had no response basically for them. Now that you are obviously aware of the safety concerns, do you want to have anything to do with the pipeline whatsoever?
Well, I would prefer that it not be built, but I think if it's built, it should be, the route should be determined on the safest possible route, not the shortest distance. I know the shortest distance is the cheapest to build, but I feel that safety should be priority number one, and that this pipeline route needs to be take that into consideration. I think we need to go farther away from some of these people's houses.
Looking at as we pull out from if you can pull out a little bit farther on the pipeline route for me, please. A little bit further. I have concerns as to how you will be able, if the construction of the pipeline takes around 2 years, how will you access your property to the south and to the west of the pipeline on your land?
Well, the property, it's a full quarter section, so I can access the property from the south road or the west road. That red section there where the pipeline's going through my property is probably a 40-acre parcel.
So there's a parcel in between to the west of yours that's connected to a road. It's hard to tell on the KMC map.
Well, my whole parcel is 163 acres there. So what's red now, where the pipeline's going through, would be considered the northeast quarter of that quarter. So I have no trouble accessing it. But if you look at this pipeline, the drawing you have now, if you go from my red parcel, if you go diagonally up and follow that pipeline up to the next red parcel, you can see Bob and Pam Limeball's place on the west side of that gravel road. They're the ones that probably have the pipeline coming closest to them. And because they're on the other side of the road, they have no input in this.
Okay, so your parcel affected is part of 160 quarter acre or quarter parcel, quarter section. Okay.
Right.
All right, thank you. No further questions.
Ms. Hyde?
Hello, Mr. Byer. I'm Chris Hike. I'm a landowner as well. Just a couple questions. You mentioned initially about your wife doing a lot of this stuff. Has she put in a lot of time in the last, couple of years?
Yes, I would say it's become our number one time-consuming project.
Has it impacted her, negatively? Has it felt good that she's done a lot of research and?
Well, yeah, I'd say it has impacted both of us. Before this pipeline project came through, I spent a lot of time preparing really good, healthy meals, a lot of fresh produce. That's time consuming. We've had more frozen pizzas this year than we have in the last 10 years put together because she doesn't have time to do all that vegetable prep anymore. So yeah, I mean it's been bad for our health, both of them. And she stays up late at night looking at the computer, and so yeah, it's been a negative impact on us certainly.
Also, do you think this pipeline is a public, is it convenience, a necessity? Is there a benefit for the public?
I'm glad you asked that because I think it's odd that the Iowa Utilities Board has say over a private pipeline like this. I don't see this as a utility. They're not providing, gas, electricity, water, sewage. I tell you what, I think it's just a money grab because the federal government put money out there, and this pipeline was concocted as a way to harvest that government money. And that's my concern about my tile lines, because, next fall we're going to elect a new Congress. If they decide to cut funding and all of a sudden that government money's gone, I think Summit will fold up like a cheap tent. They'll be gone. So I don't know who's going to come back and fix my tile lines at that point. If this were a business and they had a product to sell or a service to sell that people needed and or wanted, they would have a business plan and maybe they could keep going. But the only money involved in this is government money. It's set out there for a certain amount of time, and anything could happen to that fund. Money's gone, Summit's gone.
My final question, have you visited with your insurance agent about liability for, crops, for pollution?
Yep. We have liability and is the main one we're concerned about. And the insurance company says, no, they're not going to cover that. So I don't know who's going to be liable if something happens.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Dubinsky?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Byer. I'm Brett Dubinsky. I'm an attorney for Summit Carbon, and just a couple of follow-up questions. You had expressed at the very beginning of your testimony a concern about the amount of water that would be used in the process. Are you aware that the overwhelming majority of that water for cooling is in a closed system that will then be discharged clean locally to where it's being used?
No, I'm not aware of that.
And then you also talked about an alternative route. You're aware that the landowner directly to your north and directly to your east have both entered into easement agreements for that line as shown, correct?
Correct.
But if Summit could work with those landowners to change those angles a little bit and move that to the northeast up to the far northeast of your parcel, is that something that you would be willing to work with Summit on?
Yes.
No further questions.
Mr. Jorde for redirect?
Yes, can we pull up exhibit 647, please? And sir, what we're going to pull up, you may be able to see it on the screen, is alternative reroute. You were just asked a question by Mr. Dubinsky if you'd be willing to work with Summit if they pushed it up in the northeast corner of the parcel in Ida County we're speaking of, and your alternative route, however, shows the potential hazardous pipeline missing your property entirely and instead staying on. The individuals Mr. Dubinsky just referenced have already agreed or at least signed an easement. Is that your alternative route proposal?
Well, what's up on the screen now would be the best route for me. I'd be happy with that route, yes.
Okay. And so when Mr. Dubinsky just said, would you be willing to work with Summit, this is your proposal and you're happy to work with Summit and allow them to locate more pipeline on landowners that have already signed easements, correct?
Correct.
All right. Then you can take that down. Sir, you mentioned yield loss in response to some questions and the ability to pay. What if Summit said, we'll pay you for all the yield loss as long as you can, prove it to us, justify it, and convince us that we were actually the cause? Does that make you feel any better?
Yeah, I would like that.
Okay. And in terms of Farm Bureau's counsel, she asked you a question about social conditions, which I'm very glad she opened the door on that. And so when you're talking about social conditions, you're talking about society and whether or not this pipeline has positive effects or negative effects on society in general. Is that right?
Yes.
And for instance, the exhibit that you wanted to get into evidence, that letter to Biden, would you agree that in that letter, elected officials that formerly supported the concept of money, taxpayer-funded dollars for CO2 projects are now worried about the safety concerns for not only landowners but society and those people around the hazardous pipeline, right?
Objection, Your Honor.
State the objection.
Letter speaks for itself. I don't know that the landowner can explain what congresspersons meant and what they wrote.
Well, then the easement speaks for itself, and every exhibit speaks for itself that people get asked questions about. So I don't think that's a valid objection. I'm asking from his perspective.
Do you have anything else to add, Mr. Dublinsky? Okay. Mr. Jorde, can we reword that and move it along?
Sure.
Mr. Byer may answer from his perspective, but
And sir, what I'm getting at is Ms. Grunhagen had a confusion about, society, social conditions, and are you here today not only to speak about the concerns about your own particular parcel, but society at large, such as the taxpayer giveaway fundings and the likely negative effect on national debt and all sorts of bad effects of this pipeline and how it affects society? Is that what you meant by social conditions?
I would say that's more what I had in mind, yes.
Yeah.
I think it's...
Okay. And then she also asked you a question about the easement. Couldn't quite understand, what you were worried about the easement. You understand that the easement, if the board forces one on you, would allow this hazardous pipeline to be located forever to the end of time and be on the title of your property for all the world to know. Do you understand that?
Yes, and we do not like that either.
And you understand that Summit could choose just to abandon and leave the pipeline underground and you don't have any say. Do you understand that?
Objection, Your Honor.
state the objection.
Significantly misstates the law. The law is pretty clear that if it's abandoned for 5 years, that the landowner can revert the easement back to the landowner, and that the landowner has the option of whether or not to leave it abandoned in place or to require removal of the pipeline.
Mr. Jorde?
Yes, I'd be happy to ask. Do you know, Mr. Byer, the criteria for approving abandonment and how those can be manipulated to extend the process?
No, I'm not aware of it.
Okay. And then are you aware that Summit could construct any above or below ground appurtenant facilities that it so chooses on your land, and you have no say-so? Did you know that?
Yes, and I don't like it.
And do you like the fact that they want an access easement 24/7, 365 across 100% of your parcel, not just the 50-foot permanent easement or the temporary easement? How do you feel about that?
I like that the least of all, I think.
And are those some of the restrictions and some of the items, not even getting into the fact you can't insure against the risk, can't protect your asset against the risk, are those some of the things that you were getting at in response to the question by Ms. Grunhagen about concerns about the easement, to name a few?
yes, I think it's going to negatively impact the value of our farm going forward.
And you wouldn't purchase a piece of ground with a hazardous CO2 pipeline on it, would you?
No, I wouldn't.
Thank you. I don't have anything further.
Okay. Mr. Byer, thank you. Appreciate your testimony today.
Thank you.
Mr. Jorde, you may call your next witness, please.
Well, I'm gonna see, is Brad Frank in here? Okay.